Oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to begin the Critical Podcast 2020. Welcome, everybody. As you can see, I've got a nice little setup going here with the nice pink and purplish background. But we're going to get started right away. Welcome to the Critical Podcast 2020. We are going to be doing a lot of stuff today. The first thing that is going to be today is my game awards / top 5 games of 2020. And I'll be starting out just doing that by myself. You may see an empty chair right here. I will be joined by my brother very shortly in order to do some top 10 songs and albums, and then a slightly informal discussion on movies in 2020. So with that, I'm gonna get started right away. Cue the music. There we go. And we are going to get started right away. Obviously, having music in the background would probably be fine, but I wanted to just go in and get right into it. Hope you all have had a good day so far. Check out all of the things as usual. And we are going to get started right away with my personal game awards and top 5 games of the year. And we are going to start out with a black screen. And so I've given away or thought of various awards for this year, and the first thing I wanted to talk about, obviously a lot of these are honorable mentions just to start out with, but I wanted to start out with my personal award for the best multiplayer of this year. Now, I know a lot of people will be surprised by this because of how I've talked about it, but in 2020, a year where a lot of multiplayer games got delayed or canceled or just weren't really that good, my best multiplayer of 2020 for a game released in 2020 is going to be Valorant. And this is for multiple reasons. The devs did have to work through a pandemic, of course, to release this game, and it released in a very stable condition. You know, the beta was good, and the game overall is obviously very good, and it deserves everything it's gotten, in my opinion. And even if some of my opinions on it are a little bit mixed, overall, I still think it's a very good game that deserves this year's honors for best multiplayer game of the year. And I just wanted to give Valorant a special praise because, you know, it's one of those games that came out and it's like, it was one of the first games that I really wanted to grind a lot more of. So to Valorant, I just think Valorant deserves what is coming to it. Whatever's next for Valorant, I'm very excited for the future of this game. After Valorant, I'm going to be giving an award. This is an award that is given at the actual Game Awards every year, but I wanted to give my personal award for the best ongoing game. The game that has, sort of given its own given its own flair to the gaming industry, and throughout the years has been able to grow and eventually become a game that is worth playing. This is not to say that the game started out bad, it's to say that the devs kept on going with the game, and eventually the game did become something that was really, really worth it. And my personal award for the best ongoing game of 2020 is Sea of Thieves. And Sea of Thieves deserves it for a lot of reasons. They added so much content in 2020 amidst, again, the pandemic. And I believe that this game is unquestionably my favorite co-op game to play right now, just because of how much there is to do. And obviously the devs, you know, they kind of caught some flack at the beginning of the game for having sort of nothing to do in their game. But now it just feels like every time I hop on the game, there's always something to do. There's always something there that you can do or interact with, events, ship customization, character customization, just gameplay mechanics, gameplay loops. I do think the gameplay loop of Sea of Thieves has become more concrete and even more solidified in 2020 than ever before. And I think 2020 is probably the best year that Sea of Thieves has ever been. So that is why my best ongoing game is Sea of Thieves. And obviously, there's so much more to look forward to with the game. I think this game will grow to be one of the best co op games ever. Next up, we are going to talk about my most anticipated game of 2021. Now, there are a lot of games to look forward to in 2021. We got Elden Ring, we got the new God of War, assuming PS5's ever come into sale again. We got new Far Cry, we got new Horizon, all sorts of stuff to look forward to. But in my recent memory, there hasn't been a game I've been looking forward to as much as my personal award for the most anticipated game of 2020, which is Halo Infinite. And Halo Infinite is a game that, it also caught some flack for its showing at E3 2019. And even in 2020 when it showed its gameplay reveal, a lot of people really weren't a fan of it. And I was, I loved the art style and everything, but I have to agree that I think this game needed a graphical, polish, a little shine up. And this screenshot that you're seeing right here is from one of their recent dev vlogs where they've been working tirelessly to make the game what every Halo fan, including me, has wanted. And just from this one screenshot, you can see that they've been working pretty hard on it to be able to come up with something like this. I think the way they've been talking about it and the passion these devs clearly have for a new Halo, it just makes me all the more excited for having a new Halo multiplayer. And whatever story they choose to tell, I'm excited for it. And that is why Halo Infinite has earned my award for the best and most anticipated game of 2021. Obviously not best game of 2021 because we don't know that yet. And now we are going to be going into a bit of the more meatier segment of this gaming section of the Critical Podcast. We are going to be going into my top 5 games of 2020. Obviously, I can't really do a top 10. I think a top 5 is a little more cohesive because I do have a lot to say about each game that is going to be listed. So here are my top 5 games of the year, and we're going to start out with number 5 and end at my game of the year. To start out, my number 5 game of the year is Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout for many reasons. One, this game came out kind of in the midst of when everything with the pandemic was starting, and it came out pretty much at the perfect time, and this game really brought a lot of people together. And even for me, I didn't play a whole lot of it. I think I put in about 25 hours at the end of it all, but the game provided the fun of a party game, and it kind of brought back those memories of like the first time you play a Smash Bros game, or the first time you play like a game on a LAN party or something. It really did bring that charm of like just a fun party game, not created for competition, not created for esports, but it was created to have fun. And the game caught on so quickly that it was explosively popular, and I think it deserved everything it got. And I personally think Fall Guys is a pretty awesome achievement in the midst of everything that happened. The fact that it even came up at all was like, it's pretty awesome. I loved Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout. I loved my time with it. And obviously, there's more to come with the game. I don't know if I'll ever go back to it, but I think at the very least it deserves a spot in my top 5 of the year. And now, for my number 4 game of the year, it's going to be Cyberpunk 2077. I know this is a little bit of a strange pick to put in top 5 considering how many people really didn't like it or how much it kind of received hate for its various bugs, but for how much hype I had for this game and how excited I was, it's pretty devastating that it's this low on my list because I wanted to love this game, but there are so many things wrong with it bug wise, gameplay wise. There was just a lot of stuff that was wrong with it, but everything that was right with the game just really elevated it above other games that I've played this year. This game, it had an incredible story and incredible, cast of characters, voice acting all around. Keanu Reeves, we got to talk about it. He did an incredible job as Johnny Silverhand. And overall, I think that even though the game had its problems, I absolutely loved the game. Even though there were obviously some looming problems with it, I do think that Cyberpunk overall deserves a spot in my top 5 this year. It was an achievement. I feel bad for the devs for the fact that they had to be pushed to release it so early, but at the same time, I think with the timeline they were given, they deserve a spot in my personal top 5. And the game speaks for itself. It's an awesome game, bugs or not. Once the game is fixed up and polished, it will be remembered as one of the best RPGs and games of all time, I think. But unfortunately, a lot of the hype took away from the game. But that is Cyberpunk 2077, my number 4 game of the year. Awesome story, awesome characters. I think once it gets past all the bugs, it is a must-play game, in my opinion. Just for the story alone, like it's an incredibly well written, well thought out story, without very many distractions. So, good stuff. Now we're gonna go into my number 3 game of 2020, and that game is going to be Doom Eternal. I have an interesting history with Doom in that a lot of people have played the old games. I didn't play Doom 2016 until I think last year was when I played it for the first time, and I fell in love with it. I'd listened to the soundtrack so much, and Doom Eternal pretty much evolved on Doom 2016 in every way, shape, and form that just made the game incredible. Doom Eternal is one of those rare instances of a game where everything just comes together perfectly. Literally everything just meshes together so perfectly. The gunplay, the soundtrack, the level design, the audio design, everything in Doom Eternal was just an absolute treat to play through. And Doom Eternal was one of those games that, again, I think it's one of those games you can't go without playing. Obviously, I think the game is best experienced on PC, as it is a first-person shooter with an incredibly fast pace. But the achievement that id Software has done for this game, for Doom Eternal, it is an incredible achievement, and I will say that about pretty much every game in this top 5. Doom Eternal is a truly special game that, it may not be the longest game. It may not have crazy lore. The lore of Doom Eternal was actually one of my favorite parts of it. Just the way they told the story was fun and obviously a little bit satirical of typical storytelling, which I loved. And, they had boss fights too, which was cool. All the arena design and everything. Doom Eternal could have been my game of the year if not for the next 2 games. So, we will move on that note to my number 2 game, my second favorite game of 2020, which is going to be a little bit of a controversial one, but it is The Last of Us Part 2. And The Last of Us Part 2 was obviously an awesome game. The story was incredible. We got to talk about the elephant in the room. The death of Joel was it was taken in a little bit of a 50-50. Most people didn't like it. That's why fans review bombed it. Most people who review bombed it didn't play the game. This is not the time or place for me to talk about all that stuff. What I'm going to talk about is what I loved about the game. The game is gorgeous. Drop dead gorgeous. When I played the game, I know they're planning for a multiplayer version. It just made me excited infinitely for a multiplayer version of that game with those graphics, the style of graphics, like third person shooter stuff like that. Like the game is just drop dead gorgeous, and you barely even get to explore half of it most of the time. It's mostly just like you get to look at the beautiful vistas and like enjoy the graphics, appreciate it. Um, the story is incredibly well written, in my opinion. I think it is one of the better stories, one of the better zombie game stories. It's really, again, the best part about the two Last of Us games is that they're not zombie games. They're games about people, just so happen to be set in a zombie world. Obviously, Last of Us Part 2 had an awesome segment that was sort of Resident Evil esque that was really caught me by surprise. And obviously, Ellie and Dina, two great characters. Abby was not necessarily my favorite character in a video game, but her part was played very well, for what it was. And obviously, Joel being Joel, I think I think the worry was that his death would be for nothing, and that they would just kill him and then move on. But they used his death as a catalyst for Ellie's choice at the ending, which was not to take revenge, obviously, on Abby for killing him. But one of the beautiful things about The Last of Us Part 2 is that it's a cautionary tale about taking revenge, which is the worry that I had about playing the game was like, is it going to become a revenge fantasy? And it did, but then it didn't, which was cool. It kind of subverted its own storytelling to kind of emphasize its emphasize the point. You know, it made you really think the whole time that it was going to be a revenge tale, and then at the end, Ellie kind of, you know, the motivation from Joel's memory just being there, made her realize, you know, at the end that revenge was not worth it, and it was, in my opinion, an incredibly well thought out story. And anyone who thinks it didn't deserve the game of the year is a hate bandwagoning idiot. That's all I have to say about that. And in terms of just what I have to look forward to with Last of Us Part 2, the multiplayer portion, I think, I really hope is going to be good. I'm actually really looking forward to that and seeing what they do with that. So that's The Last of Us Part 2. Now, obviously, The Last of Us Part 2 is not my personal game of the year. I think anyone who has watched my channel or kept up with me in any way, shape, or form is going to be able to easily guess my game of the year of 2020. And there was really no competition. I thought Cyberpunk was going to be competitive with this game, but Cyberpunk wasn't even competitive with The Last of Us Part 2, nor was it competitive with Doom Eternal. So, with that being said, my game of the year of 2020 is, to no person's surprise at all, Ghost of Tsushima. And obviously, there's so much to talk about with this game. I think I'll just start at the incredible storytelling. You know, the story of Jin and Shimura, the honor code, you know, the references to, you know, Japanese cinema, you know, Kurosawa, the legendary filmmaker, and the world design, the gorgeous island of Tsushima, and all of the stuff that's in it. I can't really start at any exact place to talk about how incredible the game is. The open world design is absolutely flawless. No waypoints. The gust of wind to lead you to your checkpoint is an ingenious method of using the world to push your character forward. And it helps that the game is just drop dead gorgeous. You know, it won for best art design in 2020 in at the Game Awards, and that is that. And in the midst of this podcast, I see Darth Smash 11 with the 1 year tier 1 subscription. Thank you, Darth. I appreciate that. So, anyways, back to it. Ghost of Tsushima is an incredible story as well. You know, the story was surprisingly impactful and had a choice at the end, which I think was really interesting. The narrative was incredible. The voice acting was incredible. The characters were incredible. The gameplay, you know, I think it might have had my favorite combat of any game that I've ever played. And at this point in time, I am certain that the game is my favorite open world game of all time. And it's going to quickly rise into my favorite games of all time as time goes on and as I inevitably revisit it again and again and again. And part of my ability to revisit it was thanks to the absolutely incredible Legends update, which was a co op game that I fortunately got to play with my good friend Critic, who has been in my channel and is a mod of my channel. And, we played it so much. We put in, it was a free update, and I put in over 20 hours at least into that game mode. And Legends was just as good as the main story. It had some awesome moments, some really sick level design, new enemies. The customization was sick. Ghost of Tsushima, in my opinion, was truly a game created for the players of video games. No microtransactions. Everything in the game was earned by gameplay, and most importantly, it was a good game. There were hardly any bugs. I can't say there were no bugs, but the game was polished to a teeny, teeny polish of a shine. It was just like that little ding, those little tiny polishes that were in the game. They just all added up. Like the little things, the small things of Ghost of Tsushima made it an instant contender, and it is officially my game of the year of 2020, and it absolutely 120% deserved everything that came to it. I gotta pray and hope that they do some DLC, or I wouldn't even complain about Ghost of Tsushima 2. But you gotta do 1v1s, Sucker Punch. You gotta. Anyways, um, that has been. I know I sort of went through that quickly, but I had. I didn't really need to say a lot. I think all of the games that I've had here have spoken for themselves. We had a lot of games of this year that kind of came up out of nowhere. Some games that may have been a little disappointing for people. Games that just kind of set a precedent and stayed in their own lane and did good for themselves. Games that were stupendously hyped up, but sort of didn't live up, but had some sort of shining diamond in the rough that made it deserve at least a little bit of praise. And then some games that made us remember fun times. And obviously, as we look forward to 2021, there are a lot of games to look forward to. And 2021 is going to be an exciting game for years, an exciting year for games, I am sure. With that, that is going to be the top 5 games of the year segment of the Critical Podcast done and dusted. I really love this. Obviously, this podcast, the full podcast will be on YouTube, on my main YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/GladysTV. If you want to subscribe to the channel, you can. And this podcast will be up in its full. So I will be taking a quick intermission while me and my brother get set up for our top 10 songs and albums of 2021. Of 2020. Wow, I'm already looking forward to 2021 so much. Anyways, we'll be going to an intermission. When I come back, top 10 albums and songs of 2020. I keep on wanting to say 2021. Please get here sooner. Okay, I will be right back. Top 10 songs, albums, 2020. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Critical Podcast 2020. Um, so, this segment of the podcast is going to be top 10 albums and songs of 2020. I have with me my brother James,
No.
and we've been doing this every year. This is the first time it's been live streamed, so
Been doing it since 2016,
Yes.
which is crazy to think
since
about.
2016. Yeah, so this is our fourth year. 2016, yeah. This is our fourth year in a row doing it. Obviously, always fun to do. There's a there's an expectation of to a certain extent similarity, but this year has been a little bit different in terms of albums and such. But we're gonna get started right away. The way we're gonna be doing it is the way we've been doing it every year, which has been at least how we started it last year. Maybe not every year, but we're gonna be doing. So I'll be doing my my top
10th favorite album, 10th favorite song together is what he'll do.
Yes.
And then it'll be me, and then we'll just go that way for the whole time,
Yes.
pretty much.
You'll understand it once we get through it a couple of times. So we're gonna get started right away. Without further ado, to start out my number 10 album, and obviously as we go along and as we get higher and higher into the list, there's gonna be a lot more we have to say about the albums and stuff like that. So it's gonna progressively, get more and more like we're gonna be talking about it. And if there's any albums that maybe coincide, we'll talk about them sort of together. It's an informal podcast, so there's no real structure aside from that.
We often get into sort of off 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 kilter conversations as well about a certain song or something. We
Yeah.
might go off talking about the band in general or something like
For
that.
sure. Yeah. Well, I'm going to start out on my number 10. My number 10, I believe this is the first time ever in my life that a video game soundtrack reached into my top 10
Oh.
albums.
Okay.
And my
Interesting.
my number 10 is the Doom Eternal original soundtrack.
Okay.
And there's nothing really special to point out. It's like there's a debacle with the soundtrack where the composer didn't get a good mix done in time, but the in-game soundtrack, like when you're playing in the game, that's the soundtrack I'm talking about. The mix they created for the game. It's I don't know if you know much about Doom aside from the gameplay, but
I've heard some of the music.
the metal soundtrack just mixes perfectly with the music, and I think the soundtrack this year was especially well done, and that's why it reached into my top 10. A little bit of an off-kilter thing comparatively to everything else, but maybe not so much compared to everything else, actually. So that's, the soundtrack was overall good. I don't have one specific area other than just the entire soundtrack to point out for how good it was. My number 10 song is where it gets more into familiarity. It's going to be Poverty of Self by Currents.
Good choice.
That was probably my favorite song from their album. Obviously, their album will come up later. But the song specifically, it has great breakdown. I think Finding Currents, it was just kind of like I think they're probably one of the better metal bands that I found recently, for sure. But that song specifically just had great lyricism, great breakdown, great instruments, vocals, everything pretty much melded together. And I think, the whole album was great, but that song just kind of stuck out particularly just for just being good.
Yeah, the death metal influences in that song were really interesting to me. I'm not usually a big fan of that genre, but they really blew it out of the park. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Is that all you have?
Yeah,
Okay.
for my tens.
Fair enough. So before I get into my top 10, I just want to say in general that I feel like media of the world was what really saved 2020 from sucking entirely. I feel like if music
Yep.
and movies this year had sucked, then that would have made the year even worse. But
Yeah.
honestly, both music and movies were really my escape from a lot of the stuff going on this year. This year I started a YouTube channel reviewing music and movies, and that was something that helped keep me at least somewhat sane in the midst of everything else. I wasn't meaning to promote it, but
I'm gonna promote
it
it
just
anyway.
it just naturally came up. But yeah, I feel like this year for music was just. I mean, 2019 probably had more albums that personally resonated with me.
Oh yeah.
My top three in 2020, I think, are stronger than my top three this year. Not to say my top three are bad this year by any means, but I mean, my top three in 2019 were just insane albums.
I mean, 2019 had freaking Time Evaluator and all that. So
Yeah. But this year is still really good. I think this year was very consistent. I found at least one album each month that I enjoyed, and sometimes I feel like I have dry spells with music where there's certain months, especially in the summer, where I don't find as many good albums. But every month this year, I found something I liked, which made my top 10 list very hard to make. Um, but anyway, at number 10 for me is a band that I just discovered this year. Um, but they were someone who really blew me away as far as albums went, and that is the band Haken with their album Virus.
oh yeah, that was a good one.
I don't really listen to that much prog metal. That's the genre they're known for, but I really enjoyed what they did with it. I thought it was really interesting, and even the lead vocalist isn't necessarily someone you would expect to be the lead vocalist of a prog band. He just doesn't have the same vocal style you would expect from that type of genre. But I really liked what he brought to the table, and I just thought the album was really interesting as a whole. Now, from what I understand of the band, they have an overarching story with all their albums. I haven't really looked into the story that much, but I've gone back to one of their previous albums, and it's also really good. Although I like Virus better. Um, but I feel like this album can stand on its own, and you don't necessarily have to know the lore of the band in order to understand the album. Because I feel like the album tells its own self-contained story, somewhat a very relevant story about a virus overtaking humanity.
Yeah.
Although I feel it's more metaphorical in context of the album as opposed to literal. But it's sort of creepy how some things in the album coincide with how this year has been, which is maybe why this album resonated with me more than I thought it would. But I mean, the sheer talent of this album is just incredible. There's a 5 track run called the Messiah Complex, where it runs about 17 minutes long in total. It's divided into 5 different tracks, but they're all basically the same song. And the instrumental progressions that song goes through is just absolutely mind blowing what it does. I absolutely loved that. And there's so many other good individual songs. One of them's obviously going to be on here in a minute, but songs like Carousel, which is like 10 minutes and is one of the most fun progressive songs I've listened to, or the beginning track, which is just insanely intense. Things like that. I think this whole album flows pretty well. There's only a couple negative spots, but they're not even that big of a deal, and I feel like the album as a whole is just a solid dose of prog metal and just definitely an album that stuck with me throughout this year. Um, as far as number 10 song goes, it's always interesting. Me and Joseph seem to have some sort of common placement for a band or a song or something like that. And for this year, it's band because my number 10 song also comes from Currents,
Oh.
but it's Split for me. And Split, in my opinion, I really liked Currents' album as a whole, but Split was the one that really stuck out to me. Similar to Joseph, I do feel like Currents is one of the better new metalcore bands out there. I felt like last year a lot of metalcore felt very sort of samey to me. I was sort of getting tired of the genre, if I'm being honest. I mean, there were a couple bands like Demon Hunter and whatnot that were still making the genre interesting, but I don't know if I had maybe one metalcore album make my list last year, and I'm going to have two this year. But um, Currents really brought some refreshing stuff to the genre, and I think Split is the best example of that for me. I love how it just comes and goes, and it doesn't really do any BS. It just goes intense, and it's just so good. I mean, I love the guitar work, and I think the clean unclean vocal trade offs in the song are just awesome. And I also really enjoyed the message about mental health that the song delivered. Like the lead singer sarcastically talks about like getting better from depression, but it's like this idea that you can't really get better from a mental health problem. It's just something you have to live with and you have to deal with. And it's like him sort of accepting that he's overcoming this struggle on his own. And it is a pretty dark song in that regard. Um, but I still think that the song has a really powerful message, especially in that chorus, which is just one of the most beautiful choruses I've heard all year. So I think it was a really deep song and really goes hand in hand with the album, which also is a pretty powerful listen. So that's
Yeah.
my number 10 song.
Um, yeah, for sure. I'd agree with that. Moving into number 9. Um, I think this is a band that has reached into my top 10 every single time they've released an album, and it's no different here. My number 9 album is The Path by Fit for a King. Um, I'm under the impression that this may not reach into your top 10 for the first time.
It will not. This one will not,
which
unfortunately.
is crazy, but like you talked about not having a dry spell as often. Unfortunately, I had a lot of dry spells. So
That's fair.
my top 10 is more or less albums that I listened to at least 50 times this year. Maybe not that much, but
wow, 50.
I don't. My number 1 album, I think I listened to 50 times at least. But anyways, The Path. I agree. It's not nearly as high as other Fit for a King albums would usually have been for me. But this one, while it may have been one of the weaker ones, there were just, their Fit for a King albums, they always start out, sort of like, like, a way Fit for a King is going to start out. It's going to be like that sort of melodic metalcore sort of thing. Yeah. But there are just moments in The Path where it just, like, hits you in the gut. There are just certain songs that, like, make the album, like, you get to, I have a horrible time remembering names of songs from albums, so pardon me while I go to the album real quick because I'm unprepared for this podcast like every year.
This always happens. We always try to remember the name of a song or something and we don't remember it in the moment.
Professional Streamer, by the way. Yes. It's like when you get to songs like Annihilation, it's like it just, the top 2 songs are maybe, the first 2 songs are maybe not that good, but you get into Annihilation, you get back into it's like the best stuff that Fit for a King does is like that crazy, fast-paced, gut-punching stuff. And I just think the album, especially the second half of the album, like the last 4 songs are just like perfection. Like all 4 of the ending songs are pretty much the reason it got into my top 10. Just because I could listen to these last 4 songs, God of Fire, Stockholm, Louder Voice, Vendetta, all of those I could listen to in order as their own thing multiple times and never get tired of it. And, I think Fit for a King just does a good job with, like, just pumping you up. And it's like that energy that they bring to their songs is just something else. Obviously, if I had listened to any other album, maybe there were a bunch of albums that I missed out on this year, I'm aware, but I think that
I will say The Path would be an honorable mention for me, no doubt. I really did enjoy a lot of it, and the song "Louder Voice" would also be an honorable mention song for me. Yeah. I loved that song.
And you will see Fit for a King a little bit later in my list. But my number 9 song is a band that I think I enjoy way more than you, and that would be Demon of My Own by Like Moths to Flames from their newest album this year. It's obviously after this podcast every time we listen to our top 10 songs, so it's a little more of a softer song for them, but when I play it for you, you'll understand the song speaks for itself.
I did listen through that album one time, but I didn't return back to it, I'll admit.
I loved it. I mean, I think Like Moths to Flames has just gotten better with every single album they've done, and I think this I think No Eternity in Gold has to be my favorite album by them at this point. But this song particularly, it's a little bit of a darker song disguised in a very soft tone. And it's basically, it's about, like someone he lost, and it's just about the demons of, not being able to overcome a loss or, stuff like that. And it's a song that speaks for itself. You gotta listen to it to understand. Like, it speaks to everyone in a different way, I think, and that's what's beautiful about most good songs. So that's that.
Okay. All right. So my number 9 album. I'm almost 99% positive you've never listened to this album, but I did. This year I made it a goal, even more so than last year, to try to open my mind to other genres that I haven't necessarily given a chance, or other artists that I haven't given a chance. And this one I was actually very pleased to see it get a lot of Grammy nominations, even though a lot of Grammy nominations this year were a particular joke, I feel like, in comparison to even some other years. This artist in particular, I feel like her album just really impressed me, and it's more of an alternative album. This is an artist I've never heard of before, but I got into her this year. Her name is Phoebe Bridgers, and the album's name is Punisher. And it's a really interesting album. I'm not really sure if I can describe exactly of why I love it so much. I think it's really comes down to the atmosphere of the album. It really just has this consistent foreboding, but also sort of reassuring atmosphere. Like you feel like you're in the midst of the end of the world on the album, but also like there's this person at the center trying to comfort you in the midst of all the bad things going around and going on. And what I really liked about this album, I think, was that it showed the artist Phoebe Bridgers as being very vulnerable. She talks about a lot of different things in very compelling detail, like her relationships with not only love interests but also parent figures and even herself. And I don't know, I just really thought the album stood out this year. I think it is actually pretty understated in what it does, and it doesn't really try to show off. Like you can tell, there's a lot of talent and a lot of care put into this album, um, but it doesn't ever make it obvious to you, which is what I think is so impressive about it. It's just something that comes and impresses you like quietly, because this album was actually not one that was even in my top 20 when I first heard it, but as I heard it more, it just started affecting me more and more. And I don't know. I think it might have been because I just loved how subtle it was, and Bridger's voice is just really beautiful throughout the album. And then there's just a track that comes at the end of the album that really just blew my mind, and I'll be talking about that one more later. But um, I think the album as a whole just flows really well and has a lot of interesting things to say. It has a lot of influences from a lot of different genres, so it's very much so an alternative album in that regard because it's not only doing pop things, but it's also getting influence from rock and other places like that. That's probably why I really liked the album. It just felt all encompassing and very varied, just really interesting to listen to. So it really got up there for me. It wasn't one that I expected to be on my top 10, but the more I listened to it, the more I was like, this is definitely going to have a spot on my list. So yeah, that's my number 9 pick for album. And then for song, I did say this band was going to pop up pretty soon, but it's Haken's song Invasion. This is the second track on the album, and I feel like this is sort of the one that introduces the idea of the virus starting to come and infect people. The song is very menacing to me, and I absolutely love the journey it goes through and how they're using like a virus as a sort of symbol for losing our sense of selves and our ability to connect with people. It's very interesting to listen to. And they're really contemplating on a lot of interesting things like having a god complex and things like that. It's just really interesting to listen to. And I love lyrics like, when did we give up the ghost as a trade for the heart that begins to break, which sort of leans into that idea that we're losing ourselves and that we're losing our heart to care for other people. And I think it's really interesting. And it's obvious in this song that the band really cares about connectivity and between people and things like that. So I really liked that. And the song sort of serves as a cautionary tale in that regard, I think. And musically, I mean, this song is just incredible. It's a good example of talented prog metal, in my opinion. There's just so much fun guitar work in this song, and the vocalist is awesome. The chorus is one of the catchiest I've heard all year, and it doesn't overstay its 7-minute runtime. But I mean, I just really liked it in every way. Honestly, it was a very fun track. And even though I do love the 17-minute long Messiah complex, I feel like this one packs almost a better punch in its smaller runtime. So, yeah, that's my number 9 pick.
Okay. Well, I did say this band would appear very soon as well. For my number 8 album, it's going to be The Way It Ends by Currents. I think that, you know, I think we've said enough about Currents in already 20 minutes to really emphasize how incredible this album is. You know, they're very new and you know, new bands, new metalcore bands are always really exciting, because you can tell which ones are gonna kind of be. You can tell which ones are gonna kind of stick around and be good consistently, and which ones are going to sort of fade out. I think Currents is going to be one of those bands that becomes a staple of metalcore. They're already like gaining huge audience, stuff like that. So the album is just, through and through, it's just thrashing metalcore, and there's really nothing else I can ask for. There are some albums that I'll point to as just simply like, hey, this album is a bunch of metalcore, and I just loved it. I loved listening to it, just their instrumentation, the vocals, the mixture of Queen and Unqueen, how they weave in and out of Queen and Unqueen, and it's like the same way I like Periphery almost. It's like that weaving in between of Queen and Unqueen vocals.
Interesting.
It's just seamless, and I love that about bands when they can go from melodic to like pure hardcore, like metalcore in like an instant. And I think that's one of the band's strongest suits and one of the album's strongest suits, because it has these melodic moments intertwined with these hardcore metalcore moments, and that's kind of the mark of a great metalcore album, when you can do both, and you can do both well. So I think that's why, it's just one of those albums. I think if you're a fan of metalcore, you got to listen to it, because it's like, if you're looking forward to new metalcore, that's where you start. One of the places you can start. My number 8 song, I had a tie for this song. Out of all the ties I could have had at number 8, it was weird that I had a tie between two songs from the same album. From The Path by Fit for a King. I had a hard time between Louder Voice and Vendetta for my favorite song of the album. I had to listen to both of them so many times. There's something great to say about both of them, but at the end of the day, I think it was in my utter simplicity of 2020, and just the pure anger of Vendetta, and I just feel like Vendetta really, I don't know, Vendetta is one of those songs that you can kind of delve into the lyrics a little bit more and see it's not only about revenge, but it's about, I think to a certain extent it may have been about humanity's revenge against 2020 in a certain extent.
Maybe.
It's just the anger, the pent up anger sometimes. I think that's one of the more satisfying things about Vendetta. That's why it ended up being my number 8 and my favorite song from the album. It's just sometimes you just have that pent up anger, and you just want to. I think Vendetta is one of the best ways to just listen to the song, and you feel that release of so much anger gone.
Yeah.
And the lyricism is awesome, and it's one of those Fit for a King songs that it's Brian Kirby just let out everything he had at the very ending, and that's, you couldn't ask for anything else from Fit for a King. So that's my number 8 song as well.
Okay, that's a good choice. I won't disagree with that by any means. All right, so my number 8 pick is the first of 2 more pop-based albums that I'm going to have on this list, but I think this one more than deserves it, because this album really impressed me. But it's After Hours by The Weeknd. I really loved this album. I feel like The Weeknd is one of the best pop artists working out there right now. He's always, even when I wasn't as big a fan of the genre, he was always one that impressed me with what he did. I feel like he's very creative, and he brings back, this classic sense of pop. He feels like a modern day Michael Jackson in a lot of ways, especially his vocals sound so much like him in a lot of places. But he's also very unique on his own. Now, I'll admit, his personality hasn't always impressed me. I've sometimes felt like he's just leans too much into this very arrogant personality. But I think on After Hours, he did it in a way where it felt like it was more ironic and satirizing, as opposed to just being that's who he is. Now he's saying, you don't want to be this type of person because it leads you down a destructive path. And the album lays that out in very interesting ways. It goes into some very dark territory on certain songs. Um, Especially ones like Escape from LA and things like that. The album centers itself conceptually in Las Vegas, which I think is like the perfect place for the Weeknd personality to really shine, because Las Vegas is also a place of glamour and of arrogance and drugs and everything like that, and that's sort of who the Weeknd personality is supposed to be, like this guy who very much so is full of himself and leads into these very um, fast and quick ways of living. Um, but yeah, I just really thought this was a solid pop album, and there's a lot of good cuts on here. It feels like it owes a lot of its influence to 80s pop, which I really enjoyed. And there's so many fun songs on here. In Your Eyes is one that pops to mind for me in particular. It has a saxophone solo that I'm an absolute sucker for. Whenever a saxophone appears in a song, you know that I'm probably going to like it. I just love that in almost anything I hear. And there's just so many other good songs on here. I think the lead single, Heartless, is pretty good. Um, and yeah, the After Hours, the title track, is pretty experimental and does a lot of surprising things. And then you've got songs like Faith that are just an absolute earworm to listen to. And one of his songs is going to appear on this list, but I'll talk about that one later. But yeah, that is my number 8 pick. And I think he very much so deserved to be on my list for creating an impressive album. Um, and yeah, that's my number 8. I'll have a little bit more to say about him soon, but yeah. And as far as my number 8 song goes, this is from a band that unfortunately their release could not make my top 10 because it was an EP. Otherwise, it would have made my top 10. But most certainly one of their songs was going to make my top 10. And it's Kingslayer by Bring Me the Horizon. They released an EP this year called Post Traumatic Survival Horror. And I don't know if you ever listened to it.
I did. It will appear.
Okay. But I mean, I'll just mention about the EP. The EP is nearly pitch perfect to me. It's like, I, I was very conflicted on Amo. I'm not gonna lie. There were some really good songs on Amo, but there were also some places where I was like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Like, I didn't mind that they went pop. I thought they would do a good job at it, but the choices they made a lot of times were perplexing. Um, and then they released this EP earlier last year, late last year. That was probably their worst work to date. It was so bad. I don't know if you ever heard it, but it was like music to listen to, vibe to, things like that.
Oh yeah, I don't think I ever listened to that because I heard it was awful.
It was so bad. I'm not sure what they were thinking on that album. I think they had to let out some weird things because Ollie Sykes is a bit of a. Whenever something hits Ollie Sykes, he's going to do it no matter what.
Yeah.
That's just sort of who he is, which I sort of respect him for, but sometimes it leads to perplexing decisions. But I felt like this EP was a real return to form for Bring Me the Horizon. Of course, it has one of their. If this song had been released in 2020, it would have made my list, but Ludens is an excellent song by them. If that song had been released this year, it would have been in my top 5 probably, because I love that song.
Yeah.
But Kingslayer is an awesome song as well. And this song is insane, but I think in all the right ways. Ollie Sykes lets loose some of his most intense screams that he's let off in years, which I absolutely love. He leans into his earlier album screams, I feel like, in this song, which is so much fun. And the loud synths are so much fun to listen to. And I actually love baby metal in this song. I've never really listened to her or her band before, but I feel like I want to now because I love her voice and what she brings to the song. The chorus just feels straight out of a video game, which is of course intentional because the album has a lot of video game references in it. I mean, there's even a song that references Resident Evil, which is pretty fun. But I think Kingslayer just has a lot of fun stuff going on, and I mean, I love when Ollie Sykes just sort of goes out of his way to call out people who have unjustly criticized him. And in this song, he's calling out the fans who have said he has lost his touch and has lost his screams. And he's like, nope, no, I haven't. And I'm proving you wrong now. And I just love that he's having so much fun with it. And I mean, just a lot of interesting stuff in this song, like the combination of Japanese and English vocals was pretty cool. And yeah, it's just a whole different vibe for Bring Me the Horizon that I've never heard them do. And I would love to see them do it more in the future. More like this and less of um, songs like some of the instrumentals on Amo was what I would prefer from them.
Yeah, that's a good one. So for number sevens, my number seven album, I'm not 100% sure if you've listened to this album. You've probably heard of the band. It's Kali Yuga by In Heart's Wake.
I did
Um,
not listen to that album, but
it's
I have heard
they're
of that
they're a
band.
metal band, obviously, and this album, I can't exactly remember what culture it represents. I don't quote me on this. I believe it's Native American. I'm not 100% on
Mhm.
that. Don't quote me on that. But it's like it's an album that sort of is conceptually like the cycle of life, essentially. Um, it's a to a certain extent a concept album, but and not really. There's some stuff on it that it's like, but uh, the album itself, it's it goes a bit up and down at times in quality, but the overall arching, the Unqueen vocalist is absolutely incredible. He has this nice flow to his voice, um, and the Unqueen vocalist, or the Queen vocalist, is good as well. Both the Unqueen and Queen vocalist, they have that same mixture of tones as well, and overall the album has some really has some incredibly memorable moments. There's actually a song that will appear later from that album. Um, but overall, there are just a few songs that I want to talk about, um, which will be just a second. Yeah, it opens up with "Worldwide Suicide," which is it's if you watch the music video, it's literally about like the start of the coronavirus. Essentially,
Hmm.
it's like it's actually a pretty sick music video overall. There are some really cool songs. "Son of a Witch" has probably my favorite chorus of 2020. Um, there's this really nice country song,
Hmm.
oddly enough, where it's mainly a girl singing with like country vocals called "Crossroads" that got stuck in my head for probably 2 weeks straight. Um, there, it ends with this song called 2033, which is like a sort of reference to like where will we be in 13 years with like the global warming and all that stuff and the political uh, landscape and stuff like that. Overall, the album is just like it's just like while you're listening to it, it's like you feel like they're asking questions about like the circle of life. That's essentially what the album is about. It's like in your circle of life, like what could possibly happen, like what's going on, like Dystopia is a song about what could the future be like. uh are we gonna um are we gonna save the world or are we gonna destroy it? That's kind of one of the core questions of the album. um Along with there's just some nice cuts. One of the songs off this album will come back later in my list, but that's my number seven album. I think it's pretty good overall. It's not like crazy or anything, but I think it's pretty good. So that's my number seven album. My number seven song um, is a band that I didn't really think would ever get back into my top 10, but it's Cauterized by Red. Um, their new album Declaration was a beautiful return to form for Red, and it'll be showing up later for sure. But this specific song has a breathtakingly incredible chorus, and I just think the way they've kind of meshed all their sounds together, the violins, their classic sound now basically. There's pretty much no electronics on this album, which I didn't really prefer the electronics of their last album. Um, so I liked that they sort of went back more to their rock roots in this album. And Cauterized was specifically one of the better songs, and in my opinion, the best song of the album. Just the chorus alone was just they do so good with their choruses, and it's no different there. And the instrumentation is also pretty awesome, and you know they've been one of my favorite bands since I listened to their first album, and I think this is one of their better albums for sure, and Cauterize is probably my favorite song from the album for sure.
All right, so at number seven, I have my first of the two metalcore albums appearing on this list, and that is going to be "The Death of Me" by Polaris. Um, I this album clicked with me pretty much right from my first listen, and I still love it now. It is such a wonderful metalcore album, and I think it's more than proof that the people who are going to do good for the metalcore scene now are these newer bands who are showing that metalcore does not have to change. Like it doesn't have to become so radio accessible like a lot of actually older bands have been making the mistake of doing lately. Asking Alexandria for an obvious example. But yeah, this band, I mean, they stayed pretty well within the confines of metalcore, I'd say. It's not like it's a game changer or anything like that, but it is still really good at what it does, I think. The I mean, similar to Currence's album, I feel like the trading of the clean and unclean vocals is just quality in this album. I love the unclean vocalist in this band in particular. He is so intense. He's also the clean vocalist, isn't he?
No, they have
Oh, he's
different.
not. Okay.
They both can do clean vocals,
Oh.
but Jamie is the unclean vocalist.
Okay.
I don't remember the clean.
I
vocalist
couldn't
name.
I couldn't remember, but yeah. I just I feel like this album's arc is just really awesome, and it does a lot of awesome things. Pray for Rain is an incredible way to begin off the album, and actually reminded me of Silent Planet a little bit,
Yeah,
especially
I'd
in the
agree with that.
beginning of the
Yeah,
song,
for
which I
sure.
absolutely loved. And then you've got a song like Hypermania, which is just so incredibly intense and fun. And then Masochist was a great lead single, and is probably my second favorite on the album, I would have to say still. I love that chorus. Just
Yeah.
absolutely irresistible. Um, I mean, the first half of this album I think is pitch perfect. With it going then into Landmine, which is just a crazy thrill ride. One of the best breakdowns I've heard uh, this year at least. It was so much fun. And then Vagabond is incredible. Um, the second half isn't as good to me, but there's still a lot of good songs on the second half. Like Martyr Waves did a real good job of showing the softer side of the band, and the closer, The Descent, is incredible. But yeah, I feel like as a whole, this album was a really good example of good new metalcore and gives me hope for like the revitalization of the genre. And I can't wait to see what this band does in the future. I just hope they don't pull like a Wage War and go radio rock their next album, because that'd be really disappointing to see. Because their artistic arc is reminding me of Wage War in some
To a certain
ways,
extent, yeah.
and not the same way, but I mean on and off note.
But they're not on Fearless Records, which is a good
Yeah.
thing.
But on and off note, I I hope Wage War comes back swinging on their next
I do
album.
too. I do too. I
Because
want it.
their third album
want
was
it.
so disappointing.
I want it.
But yeah, Death of Me, incredible album. Really enjoyed it. More than deserving of a spot on my top 10. It's been on repeat for me all year. So um, now at number 7 for my song, it comes from that Phoebe Bridgers album Punisher, and it's the song I Know the End. And this track just. I think this is the one that made me start reevaluating this album the more I return to it, because this track is just really incredible. It talks about the end of the world, as the title of the song would imply, but it does it in a very interesting way to where it talks about it at the same time in very serious ways, but also doesn't necessarily take it seriously. Like it's sort of snidely sarcastic about it, which is maybe sort of fitting for a year like this where you're having to sort of look at things in a satirical way in order to mask the pain that we're living in a horrible time right now. And I feel like this song, even though it wasn't made during the pandemic, it still reflects a lot of those feelings for me. I'll admit a lot of my songs on here, several of them were influenced by the time we're living in, which is what music should do for you, And I feel like a lot of songs just contextually became a lot more interesting in that regard. But I think this song accomplishes something really rare to where I feel like almost any type of music fan could enjoy this because I feel like it tackles a lot of different genres, especially in the ending of the song. It just goes off the rails. I don't want to spoil it, but it goes absolutely off the rails at the end and has some of the most insane things I've heard a song do this year. It's just so cool to hear. And the ending of the song does feel like the apocalypse is actually happening right in front of your eyes because of all the crazy things it's doing. I absolutely love it. Um, and Phoebe Bridgers' vocals in this song are just absolutely incredible. She's able to sound really soft and restrained, and then in other parts, she's able to absolutely unleash. And there's just awesome lyrics all around on this song. I feel like just this track all around is great, and the ending just is one of the best musical moments I've heard all year. So yeah, that is my number 7 song pick.
Okay. Um, my number 6 album is an album that I only recently listened to. I tried to catch up on some albums towards the end of the year that I wanted to listen to but never did. This is an album by another sort of new band. Um, a lot of bands I've discovered are courtesy of UNFD, the current best record label in metal. So this one is no exception to that. This one is Loose Threads by Hollow Front.
I meant to listen to that album this year. I heard so many good things.
It's
about
they're a fairly new band, but yes, the album is absolutely incredible. It'll come up again in a song, but the album is just absolutely incredible from start to finish. And you know, from the very first song, it's like you said about I think what you said about Polaris. It's one of those songs that it's one of those albums that you get hooked on from the beginning. Like the first song is a little bit different from the rest of the album because it is much more. It kind of lulls you into thinking it's a little more soft, but it is through and through a metalcore album. There are particular cuts on this album to mention, like the title track is absolutely incredible. The album is more or less, I think, Loose Threads. It's a little bit disjointed in its purpose. I think on purpose, but they're particularly hard hitting tracks. Like Vagabond is an incredibly hard metalcore track. Ghosted is pretty brutal. It's just about being ignored constantly, and that's like sort of in 2020. You know, you're kind of sitting by yourself, and you're essentially being ghosted by every single person that exists, more or less. And then the ending track, Serendipity, is like sort of that like hopeful, like, you know, we'll come back from this sort of thing. And the album overall is, I think, again, it's one of those albums that I can't specifically point to one thing on it. It's just the overall thing that you have to listen to. It's just like it's one of those albums that's gonna definitely speak to you. There are some tough tracks, like Ghosted is probably one of the tougher tracks that I've listened to. Like lyrically, it's tough. It's a tough track, but this album challenges in every song to kind of one up itself. But obviously, that'll come up again. So just a heads up. But that's my number 6 album. My number 6 song, I did say this band would come up soon. Again, this is Hellbringer by In Heart's Wake. This actually features the lead vocalist from Polaris, the Unclean vocalist, Jamie. I think when I play this song for you, you're gonna instantly recognize why you should probably listen to this band, or this album in particular. The band has been around for a pretty long time, so but this song in particular is sort of a satire of the song is essentially, it starts out with this recording of an old guy saying that my son listened to metal and he thinks it's nothing more than satanic cyanide. It's essentially a song about like embracing metalcore. Essentially, it's sort of satirically like one of the lines is "Who's the devil now?" and it's like it's sort of that satirical like, yeah, I'm gonna do metalcore. Am I the devil? So what? Like it's one of those funny. The whole album is sort of like that to a certain extent, but this song in particular, I just had a lot of fun with because of the satire of the lyrics, and the music video is particularly great. So that'll be fun to listen to. But that song, definitely one you should listen to if you enjoy that type of stuff, satire. So that's my 6s.
Okay. All right. For my number 6 is my second metalcore album, and a band I've already talked about, but I do think this is the best metalcore album of the year for me. Now, keep in mind, I didn't listen to every metalcore album in the world, but it is The Way It Ends by Currents. This is another album that, like Polaris's, it did really resonate with me right away, but I think this album, whereas I feel like Polaris's album shows maybe more of the obvious talent in terms of musicianship and stuff, I think this album works for me more in terms of concept and the sort of emotional arc the album goes on, I will always be a sucker for an album that takes me on an emotional journey, and just does it so well. And I feel like this album really does that. Every track feels like it fits here. There's not really any songs that I hate on this album anymore. Even songs that I originally wasn't a huge fan of, like Let Me Leave, I still feel like they have a place on the album and make sense. But I mean, there's just so many good aspects of this album. Never There is an excellent like spoken word beginning to the album that I really think it does a good job at establishing the theme of the album, which is like this guy trying to find himself in the midst of struggling with mental health and things like that. And then it transitions perfectly into A Flag to Wave, which has such a criminally catchy chorus that I can't get enough of.
It's a great one.
And it's one of many catchy choruses on this album. And then, of course, you got Poverty of Self, which is a superb track, one of my personal favorites. And Monsters, which was a track that originally was one of my least favorites, but actually grew on me a lot. I think it was probably the chorus of that song that really got to me. And I even think even though the using of like monsters as a metaphor for like the demons in your head or things like that has been done before, I feel like the band finds an interesting way to talk about it. But I think the second half of this album is where it really hit me. I think the track run from 7 to 11 is pretty much perfect, starting with Origin, which is really cool and it incorporates these electronic elements that I love. And then you've got Split, which is of course my favorite. But Second Skin was the song that actually got me into this album. I love it just feels like a sort of classic metalcore, a song that you would hear back in the 2000s to me, which is probably why I loved it. It just has that feeling of tributing to old metalcore, while also still updating it. And then the final two tracks just pack an emotional punch. How I Fall Apart is just, oh, it's a tearjerker, but then that doesn't compare to Better Days, which is a powerful song.
Yeah.
I was almost tempted to put Better Days as my favorite from the Currents album, because that one comes so close, but Split was the one that sort of hit me more at the end of the day, but I can't say enough for the final two tracks as well, which really end this album off on a really powerful note. So yeah, just a really good album. I can't wait to see what this band does next. This is their second album, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's their second,
And yeah, it's just really impressive. But yeah, that's my number 6. And then for my number 6 songs, we actually go back to my other metalcore band with Polaris with their song Vagabond. I was really surprised that Vagabond ended up being my favorite, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense that Vagabond was my favorite. I think maybe what makes it my favorite is that it reminds me of Era a lot, especially in like the guitar work and stuff like that. It just sounds like an Era song to me in some ways.
I can see that.
And yeah, that's a huge compliment because we both love Era.
Yeah.
Very disappointing that they didn't release their album this year, but I understand why.
Oh, but that didn't stop them making my list.
Oh, I figured they might, but if I'm imagining they'll release their album next year, they'll probably make my list next year.
You are sorely missed.
Yes, but anyway, I really liked the message of this song and like trying to find peace in the midst of the unknown. Which, I mean, I don't. It's just weird how many albums this year felt like their themes were just so appropriate for what this year was like. So this song was very assuring.
It wasn't
to
accidental, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, the lyrics feel very descriptive to me. I love the line like "see the world in shades of monochrome." That's such a cool lyric to me. You don't hear bands using that type of language all the time, and I really loved that. And I think in this one, Polaris did a particularly good job of trading off between clean and unclean. It was just really good to me. So I didn't have a whole lot to say about this song, but it's just a fun track for me. That's all it really comes down to. And I love the message of it. So yeah.
Okay, so for number 5s. This is where the fun begins. I don't know, not really, but...
I think it does.
My number 5 album is No Eternity in Gold by Like Moths to Flames. It's been... I don't think Like Moths to Flames has made a top 5 for me until this album. If you listen to the album all the way through, obviously I think I'm a little bit more in tune with LMTF than you are. But I just love Chris's unqueen and queen vocals, and every single album he's gotten better and better and better. It's it's essentially a concept album. The name of the album speaks for itself. It's about you can have your. There's actually a particular song on the album called God Complex. It's like it's essentially the ending song is the title track where No Eternity in Gold, but God Complex in particular is one of those songs. Like I think one particular quote, "Possessed by a God Complex," kind of describes the entire album. Like Moss to Flames kind of had a little bit of a more positive message with Dark Divine, but this is more of an album that you'd expect from them, where each song is like talking about the stuff that maybe other bands wouldn't talk about, a little bit more, a little bit harder stuff. One of the actually my favorite song, "Demon of My Own," is a hard song talking about loss. A lot of the album is talking about you don't have an eternity in gold like in possessions. I think this was very much so like a. I feel like Chris. I don't know if he's like. I don't think he's changing faith or whatever because there's a lot of stuff on this album that's very much so driven by just anger. The whole album, it just feels like angry, like Moss to Flames is like back, and Chris is a very good at being angry because his unqueen vocals just lend to that style so well, and there are a lot of songs on the album that are absolutely they're they're hardcore, and it's one of those albums that like everyone pointed to this album as like this is their comeback. They're back, and everybody's gonna everybody who didn't listen to them is gonna listen to them again because it's so much like it's just their style, and it's not only is it conceptually relevant for like it's not talking so much about the pandemic state. It's actually more of a reference to the political stuff and the types of people that were in 2020. It's targeting a certain person that would be like possessions or whatever, but it's hard for me to explain. I tend to not try to over explain that, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's like it's one of those albums that's like you listen to it and you understand what they're saying. They're like it's a very pointed message, and that's what I liked about it. So that's that. My number 5 song, I did say once again that this band would come back. It's actually the first track from Hollow Front's Loose Threads, and the title is Afflicted. It's a fairly soft song comparatively to the other ones. It gives me a little bit. I don't know. It's almost like the softness. It sort of gives me like a Perfect Circle vibes to a certain extent, but there are some parts that are like I don't know. It's like if Periphery's soft songs, sort of to a certain extent. It's just that very like atmosphere setting, mood setting type of song that I don't know. Opening songs that are like really soft like that. Like I don't know. I guess I can point to like Terminus from Timed Evaluator. It's sort of that sort of vibe where you immediately understand, like you get the vibe of the album from the beginning, and it holds it until the end. And Afflicted is just that perfect vibe setting, tone setting song that I love when albums start out with a song that make you anticipate what the rest of the album could be, and that's like sort of why it's in my top 5 for sure. So
Okay. All right. So for my number 5 through 1, I have the feeling we're not going to have a single album that correlates, except for maybe my number 1. Maybe this album will appear on your list, but I'm not sure. But I don't think my 5 through 2 any of these will be on your list, so it'll be interesting. But my number 5 is what is most certainly my favorite pop album of the year, and it's Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. I absolutely loved this album. It was an addiction for me. I'll admit. I listened to it a lot of times this year, and it was just so much fun. The title of the album is exactly what it sounds. It's basically bringing like this retro '80s pop groove into the modern age and sort of updating it, while also still very much so feeling like it could belong in the '80s at points. And I think that's what I like about it. It just feels like I don't know. I haven't listened to a pop album that has had this much fun and this much legitimate energy in a long time. And I mean, the talent of this artist shines through. I feel like she's a relatively new artist, but I feel like she has a lot of, obviously, a lot of potential in changing the pop scene, and especially in the bigger pop scene, because she's one of the biggest artists working right now at this moment. A lot of her songs have gotten huge, although not as many on this album as I would have hoped. But I think this album as a whole was just it worked excellently. So many good tracks on it. The title track starts off this album excellently, and then you've got a song like "Don't Start Now," which I thought was a really good hit song, and I didn't mind hearing it a lot because it was on pop radio a lot. And there's just I think there's so many good groovy songs here. Levitating is a lot of fun too, and then you've got songs that feel like they're attributing to other songs, like Love Again does a lot of sampling of songs from the 80s. I can't remember the songs' names at the moment. And then Break My Heart has a bass groove that reminds me of like another one, Bites the Dust by Queen, which I found really interesting. That one became one of my favorites, partly because of that, but also because it's a really catchy song. And I think, I mean, there's not much to say about this album because it really is just a fun, danceable album, and it was nice to find an album that you could just have fun to. A lot of my albums this year, I would say, leaned a bit on the darker side, which is sort of fitting. But this album was definitely much more lighthearted and everything like that. And that's not to say it didn't have any thought-provoking content, because I think it did. I think the final track, "Boys Will Be Boys," was actually giving a pretty good message about toxic masculinity culture and things like that. And yeah, I just thought the album was a lot of fun. One of the songs I will be talking about in a minute, but I thought it was just a really good pop album. It really surprised me and really blew me away. And then at number five, we also have a pop song, and what I would say is the biggest song of the year, "Blinding Lights" by The Weeknd.
Okay, that is from that album.
Yeah.
I think every person on YouTube listened to that song when it came out.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you do, but I don't know of a single person who dislikes this song.
No, it's
I,
great. It's a great song.
I think it is freaking awesome. I mean, of course, some of its early appeal for me came from the fact that it was sampling "Take on Me" in its synth riff. But it definitely becomes its own entity to me and very much stands out on its own. And it's probably one of the songs I've returned to the most out of the year, so I knew it was going to make my list. And it kept on going higher and higher the more I heard it. I mean, The Weeknd's voice in this song is just irresistible to me. That chorus is just wonderful, and the beginning of the song, every time it goes into that synth groove, it feels so like energetic and alive. It's one of the most alive songs I've heard all year. It just has such a natural energy to it that I absolutely love. And I think The Weeknd does a good job at having this like menace in the verses. It feels like very mysterious in the verses before going into the chorus where it really unleashes. And I think the song is pretty clever, especially for a song that uh, charts on the Billboard where you don't typically expect the most thought-provoking content out there all the time. But this song, I feel like it can be interpreted in a variety of ways. I feel like it could be talking about with the blinding lights. I think it could be a metaphor for like Abel's relationship with another girl, but I also feel like even more interestingly, it could be his relationship to fame and how he's blinded by the fame sometimes, and that makes him become reckless, which is a really interesting thing to think about. And it becomes even more interesting in context of the album, I think. The song even works better when you listen to the album as a whole. So yeah, this song was just it's just so much fun to listen to, and I haven't gotten tired of it. So yeah.
Tis indeed. Gotta listen to that album. I meant to when I listened to that song, but anyways, my number 4 album said they would appear again. This has been a band that I've been listening to pretty much since I started listening to music, and aside from their last album, they've reached into my top 10 ever since I've done top 10s. Pretty much they've reached into it, so except for their last album. But my number 4 album is Declaration by Red, which I said this previously. It's it's a stunning return to form for Red. it's hard. It's to be fair, Red made and Red probably gave themselves the worst challenge possible when they made of Beauty and Rage. Imagine trying to come back from that.
You can't top an album like that.
It's like, geez, I feel sorry for them for making an album that good and trying to make albums after that. But anyways, just from the beginning of the album, it's such a I think it might be their second hardest album after of Beauty and Rage. I think it's got to be at least up there.
I would debate it's their most intense.
It's
musical.
Every single song is so intense. Like Infidel, Cauterize, Sever. It's like all these songs are just like what you want from Red and even more. It's like when you get Red on the right day, it's like you just never want to stop listening to them. Like Randy's voice is so incredible. Like, and each time they've released an album, like I feel like they're mixing the quality of their songs. Having Red, with the new the violin stuff now, like orchestral plus Red is like ever since of Beauty and Rage, that's been like their sort of keystone, and combining the hard rock of this album with like the violins, it gives you vibes of Beauty and Rage, but there's a lot of stuff. Even the ending song from The Ashes is like absolutely just like classic Red more than anything, and like The Evening Hate is obviously just like
awesome song,
brutal song.
Yeah.
The War We Made just has that. It's like the song that I point to. It's like every Red song has a unbelievably addicting chorus that you can't get out of your head for 2 weeks. That's The War We Made, in my opinion. And obviously, Cauterize was on my list at number 7, so that's my favorite song from the album. But it's hard to choose. You just listen to this album, and Red albums, when they do it right, have such a nice flow that like everything just comes together, and you finish it, and you're like, oh man, that was so good. It's just a classic Red album, and I hope they kind of take the momentum with how good it was and ride it into their next album, because I want to see more of that. My number 4 song is from a band that I also I think, well, you mentioned, it's my first time mentioning it. It's Hypermania by Polaris. That was actually ended up being my favorite song from the album.
Okay.
I'm as surprised as you are that it was, because it's one of those songs. It's like a 2.5 minute cut, but like when I listen to the song, it's like the energy you get from the song. It's just like it's an infectious amount of energy. It's like the song just has this intensity, this urgency. It's like it's one of those songs that kind of like I feel like represents 2020 really well. Like trying to just like Hypermania is literally like doing things, like being obsessed with doing things, like doing multiple things. And I feel like that's like the song is like the perfect amount of chaotic energy that 2020 had, like trying to do so many things at once. And it's like, but they just so beautifully put it together while also making the song feel coherent. And it has a great guitar riff, probably one of my favorite guitar riffs of the year. And Jamie's voice is just addicting his unclean vocals are just addicting, and that's pretty much it. It's a 2 minute cut, not much to say other than that.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah. Okay, at number 4, this is a group that I've slowly been getting into over the years, but I feel like I finally really started respecting them a lot this year, and I'm definitely going to return to their past works and try to appreciate them more. But it's this group known as Run the Jewels, and this album is called RTJ4. They're a rap duo. One of the rappers is named Killer Mike, the other is named LP. They actually made a song for Cyberpunk this year.
I knew I recognized that name.
Yeah, they made a song for Cyberpunk this year.
I knew. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was actually one of the singles.
Which was a really good song, but that one is
a
not
great
going to be on this list. In fact, there isn't going to be a song from this album on the list. This is the only song, unfortunately, the only album on here where there isn't going to be a song from the album making my list. But still, to say this album is awesome. One of the best rap albums I've listened to. The production on this album is immaculate, and it's just a wonderful ride from start to finish. A lot of people talked about how this album felt scarily relevant to this year, especially in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. And there's even a song on here, which was my favorite on the album, called Walking in the Snow, where Killer Mike says the lyric, I can't breathe, which you might recognize that as an unfortunate thing that George Floyd said before he was tragically killed. Um, but that lyric was made before that ever happened. And the song becomes all the more haunting because of that, because the song becomes applicable to um, just people of color in general, I feel like. And it's a really powerful song talking about racism and things like that. Um, and there's a lyric like, let me find it, that I just need to speak up on, where it says, all of us serve the same masters, all of us are nothing but slaves. Never forget the story of Jesus. The hero was killed by the state. That just cuts so deep. I love that song. That's a significant honorable mention for me as terms of songs. But the whole album is really good, and the album does have a lot of fun in other places. There's a song called The Yankee and the Brave that is so much fun. And then there's this ending song, A Word for the Firing Squad, that once again has a saxophone that I absolutely loved. And there's even some songs on here that remind me of like rap rock, like feel like something you could hear from Linkin Park, which is pretty cool. So the song has a variety of things going on, which is what I love about it. And you can tell the duo just have such a good chemistry. I mean, a lot of people love them. They're one of the biggest rap groups out there. And I think I finally got them on this album, and now I want to go back to their other releases and really digest them, because they have a lot of really interesting stuff to say. So yeah, I loved this album.
I did not realize they made an album. I'm gonna have to listen to that. I love their cyberpunk song.
I think you'd like the album, honestly. It's pretty good. Pretty dang good. Okay, now at number 4 is a song that I am going to admit is not going to be for everyone. But this song really hit me hard when I first heard it. It's by this artist named Fiona Apple, and the song is called For Her. And I'll be talking about this artist in a minute, just as a spoiler, but she's more of a critical darling, I would say. Critics absolutely love her, and I can sort of see why after listening to this song. But it's definitely very unconventional. It's a song that emphasizes heavily on percussion. There's not a whole lot of other instrumentation going on in this song, which that's sort of what I like about it. Is that the progression of the song is very unpredictable, and there's this beat change that's in the song, and when you hear it, you'll know it. That is just one of the most insane time signature changes I've heard in any song ever. It is like wild to hear, and it just comes out at you out of nowhere. And I mean, probably what stands out the most about this song, besides that, is lyricism. Fiona Apple. I don't want to speak much on it because I feel like it's sort of uncomfortable to talk about it, and it's meant to be, but it talks about sexual assault, and it even says the R word in it. You know the word I'm talking about. In one lyric that is just, oh, it is so haunting to hear. But it's really powerful, and it paints a really important message, I think. And then the song ends with just her vocals sort of layering on top of one another, and it creates this really dissonant effect that sent like chills up my spine. So this was a song that it sucker punches you. It's only about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and it's like merciless in terms of what it does to you, but then it leaves, and it's just incredible. So that's all I'm going to say about the song, because I feel like it speaks for itself, really.
All right. Well, my number 3 album. I'm gonna have to take a little bit of a get out of jail free card for this one, because you previously mentioned this album is an EP, which I did not recognize until I put it into my top 3 and you said it. But I'm gonna have to take a get out of jail free card, because my number 3 is Posthuman Survival Horror by Bring Me the Horizon.
I mean, it's a half an hour long. Some albums
it's
are
not,
shorter
it's
than
9
that.
tracks. It's
9 tracks,
tracks.
half an hour. They should have marketed it as an album, in my opinion. Cause
I think it's long enough to be an album.
Yeah, it's album
sure.
length and it's quality to be an album. So I'm fine with you putting
it's gonna
it
be there anyways. So
I don't care.
deal with it.
It's your list.
But,
I don't care.
Bring Me the Horizon is one of those bands, a lot of people knew them from their metal days. I think both of us were introduced to them by That's the Spirit, which is...
I was actually introduced to them by Sempiternal.
Oh, well, I think I was introduced to them by That's the Spirit, but obviously that was a little bit later. But, obviously, after listening to their 2 pop albums, it's hard to say, when I think my favorite album by them is There Is a Hell. Um, because just it's a hauntingly good album, but
Tough one. I think Sempiternal is probably my favorite.
I love.
But I love That's the Spirit. For me, That's the Spirit and Sempiternal are in constant competition.
Yeah. I don't know. There's just something about There Is a Hell. I don't know. That's a conversation for another day. But this album in particular, Survival Horror, obviously, the whole album is essentially a reference to Resident Evil, which is exceptionally fitting. And the thing about, when I started this album, the very first song is, it just immediately gets you into it. Dear Diary, it's like, it has a reference to both Silent Hill and Resident Evil. I know Ollie is a huge fan of Resident Evil, so I was very happy when those lyrical references came up. I was surprised. When you said to listen to the album, I was not expecting metal, basically.
Yeah, I told you you'd be surprised.
A full return to metal. It's like,
yeah.
After listening to their last two albums, you wouldn't have thought that. But everyone is like, it's almost like some people could say they did it on purpose. Oh, they went pop so they'd get radio rock and then go back into metal. So
yeah.
It's like, no, Ollie just does what he wants.
Yeah, he does whatever he wants.
He's such a unique artist, and I think that's what makes this album so unique. It's like, it is a little bit of everything. It really is a little bit of everything. There's metal. Teardrops is Linkin Park,
yes,
which is awesome.
So much fun.
Basically, everyone in the comments was like, you can be Linkin Park, and we're okay with that.
In some ways, Bring Me the Horizon reminds me of a modern day Linkin Park.
I mean, yeah,
they're a band who, like Linkin Park, they do whatever the heck they want,
and they do good at everything, basically.
Yeah, except for that last EP, which was just very questionable.
Yeah. Well, we won't talk about that. Even obviously one of their songs is going to be on here later, but in terms of you mentioned Kingslayer. Kingslayer and the other song that will be in my top list later, were in competition. I love Kingslayer. It's a great song. It's like some of his best screams.
Yeah.
Some excellent guitar work. You mentioned video game. I got more of an anime. More of an anime vibe from it, but that makes sense. The ending song. Mm-hmm. He got the girl from Evanescence.
Amy Lee, freaking Amy Lee. Yeah.
It's like, how do you get Amy Lee on a song? It's like, wow. But there, Ludens is on this album, even though that came out last year. That's an awesome song. I think me and you both mentioned that when Ludens came out, we were like, I hope their next album is like this, and it did not. It did not disappoint.
Yeah.
Parasite Eve is a great mixture of I feel like Parasite Eve is like a mixture of past, present, and of their past and their present, like that sort of pop vibe, and then the more of their sort of rock, I guess, where they're hopefully going back into sort of rock, even electronic rock. That's essentially That's the Spirit was electronic rock mixed with. The beautiful thing about Bring Me the Horizon is we could talk about genres all day and never figure out what genre they are.
Yeah.
Because they do everything, and I think they do just about everything very well.
Yeah.
So,
I will say, while we're on the subject, even though Kingslayer did make my favorite, I was very heavily considering putting One by One on my list, 1X1,
that's good.
Because that chorus in that song is just killer, and
yes,
that one brought me the That's the Spirit vibes more than anything on the album. But
I mean, they nail their choruses all the time, and it's incredible. But that's just the album overall is it's so memorable, and it's it brought them back.
I agree. Great album.
My number 3 song is a song that I'm 99% sure you haven't heard. It's Gray Area by Pucifer. Pucifer is Maynard's third band.
I've heard of them, but I didn't hear that song.
They will also be appearing later. Wink, wink.
I had a feeling.
But this particular song is Pucifer is probably Maynard's weirdest band for sure. This song will show you exactly why. The song is just talking about Maynard loves his politics, and this song is basically just talking about the gray areas of 2020, and he's basically saying they don't exist. He doesn't. The song is the song itself, ironically enough, is a gray area talking about gray areas, but it's just a hauntingly deep vocal song, and it's hard to explain Pucifer accurately without listening to them. I can explain Tool all day. I can explain A Perfect Circle all day. Pucifer is one of those bands you've got to kind of listen to and digest for a few days. Uh, but Gray Area in particular is a very haunting song about, you know, don't get lost in the gray area, I guess, to a certain extent, which is very interesting. The whole, yeah, Gray Area, great song.
All right, so for my number three, I did say I was going to be talking about this artist very soon, but it's Fiona Apple with her album Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Now, a lot of times when I listen to albums that are critically acclaimed, I don't like being a contrarian, but I feel like a lot of times when I do listen to critically acclaimed albums, and I do try to do that because I feel like I am someone who is passionate about critiquing all kinds of music, and I want to see what the critics are liking. I do that with movies, so why shouldn't I do that with music? Even though I admittedly do it a lot less with music than I do movies. Because with music you like what you like, but a lot of times with critical darlings, I'm just like I don't really get it, but I guess I see some appeal. But with this album, I feel like I did see the appeal pretty quickly. Um, this is definitely not an album for everyone, I feel like, but then again, a lot of people did like this album. I'm on this music site called Rate Your Music, and a lot of people gave this like fours to fives. In fact, this got the first perfect score from Pitchfork in years, and Pitchfork is a well-known, very critical site that rarely gives out perfect scores, and they often give out lower scores. So I knew I had to check out this album when I heard that because that's just something you don't hear of very often. And I think it is a really good album. It's one that takes a while to really figure out because there's a lot of wild things going on in the album. Similarly to For Her, this album emphasizes a lot on percussion, and it sounds like she's using, and I think she is, literally using household items for percussion, like pots and pans. And even one song uses her dogs as percussion, which is really wild and strange, but it's also sort of cool. There's even a dog on the album cover, so. But it's a really, I think it's just a raw talent album to me, honestly. I think it's the best written album of the year too. The lyrics are excellent on the album, and it really dives into Fiona Apple's personality. I mean, like a song like Under the Table, it has this very simple setup of her and this boy being at a dinner party, and it's like people are thinking she's being too loud there, or things like that. But the song is ultimately leading to the lesson, to the idea that no matter how many people try to kick her or bring her down or silence her, that she's not going to shut up anyway. And I think it's interesting that she uses something as simple as a dinner party for setup of a lyric like that. And there's other great songs on here too. I mean, it's just a lot of slice of life stuff is the interesting thing about it. She uses these very simple slice of life things like a friend that she had when she was bullied in school, or just simple relationships like her, an experience she had where a guy cheated on her, things like that. And she's using these simple experiences to bring across pretty powerful messages, which is what I really liked about the album. And I can't really describe just how well written it is, but it is an album that, I mean, as a person who's passionate about English, I love things that are written in a way that feels very Englishy, and I think that this album is that. There's a lot of symbolism and a lot of stuff you can look deeper into, so I was a sucker for that. So that's why this album ranks high, and I think just musically and lyrically it was excellent. It's not perfect, but it's really, really good. Okay, and then at number three for me is the song Physical by Dua Lipa from her album Future Nostalgia. Um, this is another song that I didn't think would be quite this high, but as I heard the song more, the more I loved it. Similarly to Blinding Lights, this is just sort of a fun song. And also similar to Blinding Lights, this song is also interpolating a classic 80s song. This one is interpolating the song Physical by Olivia Newton-John. You'll probably recognize the interpolation when we listen to the song, but I actually think this song is better than the original, in my opinion. I just think it's so much fun. It feels the most distinctly 80s on the album, in my opinion, which is probably why I loved it the most. It just feels like something that could belong in that era, and that's my favorite era of pop by far, is the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
But it also feels timeless because it does update it to make it feel like it could belong in the modern age in many ways. And I think Dua Lipa is just an excellent vocalist on this. I think she's one of the best pop vocalists right now. She just has so much clear talent, and the chorus is just unbelievably addicting to me. The song even has a bit of a subtle rock vibe to it. I can hear the guitars in this song, which I always love when pop songs find a way to incorporate guitars in some way and make it work. So that's another thing. This song, I mean, it's not going to be for everyone because once again, it's a pop song, but I think it does. It is very appealing in what it does, and I think it works very well. So yeah, and that's why it ranks so high for me for sure.
All right, into number twos. My number two album is Existential Reckoning, which is the album by Pucifer that was released this year. Um, Again, I have to address that this album, just like you say for pop, Lucifer is not for everybody. They are an exceptionally weird and experimental band that they do things that most I don't think any. When I listen to this album, this is actually the first Pucifer album I've listened to. Um, they do things that I don't think any other band has pretty much ever done. They do weird stuff, and this album is no different. Um, a lot of the songs from the album, the very first song is a little more like what it's a little more understandable. But as the album goes on, it gets a little bit weirder. Bread and Circus is the name of the first song. He always has such weird names for his songs. But the whole album is essentially like existential reckoning. That it's essentially a reference to like throughout 2020 we're in this like existential like year of like in a crisis of like self, and that's essentially what this album is about. The second song on the album, Apocalyptical, has a good lord hilarious music video that I strongly recommend watching. It's very funny. And then Theorem has like I think it's like a 15-second silence in it. It's just like they're just those weird songs. But then there's songs like A Singularity that talks about like that it talks about his mom who he's talked about she lived for 26 years with paralysis. That's what the whole album of 10,000 Days is about. And that's Tool, obviously, but this one song, The Singularity, is about, it's just like, you are the one person, no one else, I think is a lyric from that. And it's a hard-hitting song for people who have lost someone, and it's obvious Maynard, that subject matter is extremely important to him, so that song is a little more serious, but then there's a song like Fake a Front where the girl from the album, her name's Karina, she like works with him, and she says STFU like in a very hilariously sarcastic way. So there's anything from like dead serious to like alien sound effects on it. So it's like it's so weird, but it's so good in very many ways. In terms of my number two song, this may be a little bit of a surprise. My favorite song from Posthuman is actually Obey.
That's a good one, though. I do like that one.
I think it might be the most addicting chorus in a song I might have ever heard. The music video is obviously drop dead hilarious.
Yeah.
If you've watched it, you know we're talking about gay dinosaurs, basically, which is hilarious. It's Ollie again, so
yeah.
Can't really count out anything. But the song itself is satirically that way because under it, one of the lines is "Just don't wake up and smell the corruption." The whole song is basically like everything's okay. It's like the Megazords or whatever. It's only because it's like literally a reference to Power Rangers that I know that.
Yeah.
But the song is basically like a symbolism for the higher powers of politics. Probably one particular person, but it's a great song. It's so addicting, and Youngblood, I think that's the guy's name.
Youngblood. Mm-hmm.
I've never listened to him, but he did a pretty awesome job in this song as well. So
he's certainly a very bizarre artist. When you listen to, you can tell where his influences come from. But
yeah,
he's a very I think he's a very charismatic person though, and his energy is just
Oh yeah,
insane.
he had a huge amount of energy in the song. So,
Yeah, he fit that song perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good choice. Okay, so my number two pick. This will be from a band you've heard of, but I'm not sure if you've listened to this album. Is For album is "Imploding the Mirage" by The Killers. Um, Now, The Killers were actually a band that we play. Me, Joseph, and Samuel play rock band on. Uh, I'm losing
Xbox.
Xbox. And The Killers had a song on there that we played over and over. And I really enjoyed the song, so I wanted to hear more from them. And I mean, there's songs from them that I realized I had never heard. Of course, I think everyone's probably familiar with Mr. Brightside. That's a huge song.
Oh, yeah.
And so good. And their first album is excellent, I think. It's a pretty much nearly perfect album. But I actually listened to all their albums this year, and I feel like their first two are really good, but then they sort of got mediocre later on. They were trying to replicate the first album over and over again, which, when you make an album like your first album, which is still their best, it's hard. You're always trying to live up to that legacy. It's a huge curse when your debut album is your best, which not many bands. Yeah, not many bands can say that, but I feel like with this album, Imploding the Mirage, they did something different to me, which is why it works. And even though I still think their first album is my favorite, this one could take that spot with time because I absolutely love what this album does. It feels like just a classic rock album in almost every sense of the word. And I mean, as you can tell from my list, there haven't been that many rock albums that have made my top 10. In fact, in previous years, I feel like rock has been largely missing from my top 10 list for quite some time, which is like strictly rock. I'm not saying any subgenres like hard rock and stuff, because those might be, but strictly rock has been missing from my lists for quite some time. I feel like the genre as a whole is in a huge rut right now, which is very disappointing, because it's still technically my favorite genre, but I feel like it's suffering. But the Killers really brought some revitalization to it, and I think they made a good choice by making it like synth rock. So they add a lot of cool electronics to the album that is so much fun to listen to. And yeah, the album just shines from front to back. I also feel like it is an interestingly religious album. Like it highlights on the lead singer Brandon Flowers' spirituality in very interesting ways. I believe he's a Lutheran, if I'm not mistaken, and he talks about his spirituality in very interesting ways and how that affects his relationship with his wife. It's obvious he really loves his wife because a lot of this album is about their love for each other, and it's really quite sweet to hear. But it also, affects his inward personal journey, and a lot of this, I mean, this whole album feels very inward to me and like very reflective and very personal, which is why I really liked it. And yeah, from front to back, I think the album is almost pitch perfect. And there's just so many good cuts. Lightning Fields is the song that I would say is dedicated to his wife, and it goes to epic lengths in terms of what it does. The chorus is just incredible. And then you've got a song like Caution, which is sort of classic Killers to me and has such a good guitar solo. It's actually the guitarist of the band The War on Drugs, which is a pretty big rock band, and it's cool to hear them in this song. And then you've got, you've got just so many other great tracks on here, like Running Towards the Place, once again, just gives me those classic rock vibes. And then My God has an incredible guest vocal performance from this artist named Wiseblood, who I really enjoy. And the closing track, which is the title track, is also pretty incredible. There's just so many good songs on here, and I just absolutely adore this album. It it was nice to see a rock album finally on my list again, and this album was just incredible to me. One of the only two albums this year that I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. So that tells you how much I love it. My number two song also comes from The Killers, and it's My Own Soul's Warning is the name of the track. And I almost put this song at number one, but I decided against it, and ultimately I think my number one was obvious to me anyway. But I think this song has such powerful emotion in it. I think it makes that emotion more through its music than its lyrics, because the beginning of the song, I just love when it goes into this like synth/guitar riff that is so cool to hear, and it just feels powerful, and it almost feels spiritual, which is fitting for the song's title, because this song I think is the most spiritual of the album, where Brandon is talking about his spirituality and how he feels like something doesn't feel right in his soul, and that maybe his relationship with God is off, and then he sort of you feel him sort of starting to accept him back into his life as the song goes on, which is really cool to listen to. I feel like a lot of Christian songs this year got it wrong in terms of talking about spirituality because they make the lyrics too obvious or too cheesy or things like that. But this song nailed it by making the lyrics feel very powerful, and the music was just it felt otherworldly, which I feel like spiritual songs should feel like that. Not to the point of being obnoxious, but to the point where it works, which is what I think this song did so well. So yeah, absolutely love this song.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, our number ones of the year. My number one album of the year. Fake drum roll, no drum roll. There's no drum roll. Okay, it's "The Death of Me" by Polaris.
Oh, I didn't know that one would be
Has
that
been
high for you.
awarded my album of the year for 2020. You talked about it a lot, and you pretty much nailed everything that I think about it. I think it might be one of my. It's got to be one of my favorite metal albums of all time. It's like I do think I've listened to it at least 40 times, if not more, this year. It was probably my most played album of this year. It's just memorable from back and forth. Like it's just what I was talking about with other albums. Like it has this really nice flow that you go from song to song to song, and it's like it just feels like every song just melts into the other one and gets better and better. And the ending, like you said, the descent is just like a perfect explosion of the entire album into one song. And it's like it kind of gave me those, like, I don't know. It's a mixture of everything I love about metal. It's like the melodic with the hardcore metal with the energy of a new band. You can tell they're just so energetic about like what they do, and it's such a creative album too because they have so much, like you said, like "Pray for Rain" starts out with more or less spoken word, but like with screaming. It's like that Silent Planet vibe, like you said. They just do so much creative stuff with this album. It's like you don't hear the little intricacies of the album. Like I think each song just has such a memorable guitar riff. It's like each song is like its own thing, but yet they all kind of add to the album as a whole. It's like I said, Hypermania was kind of one of my shocks of this year of how good it was. Like each time I listened to it, I came back and I just felt more energy come from it. It's like one of the places I got a lot of creative energy from this year is like that one song. It's like this album in general just gave a lot of creative energy, and I think just because they put so much creativity and thought into like, especially the lyricism of the album. You talk about guitars and stuff. I feel like lyrics in albums aren't talked about enough, and like this album has so many good lyrics, and like even though the album is mostly conceptually about the death of me, it's like the ending is like it's got this sort of pessimistic optimism, and is the best way I can put it. But I just absolutely loved the album, and I will say overall for albums that I do agree with you in the sense that my top three this year were not as good as last year. I don't think. I don't think an album reached. I think Polaris was the highest one at 4.5, just because there was one song I don't think I was really a huge fan of. None of my albums reached a 5 out of 5 like Time the Evaluator did last year, but
that was 2018, by the way, not 2018.
Oh yeah, that was 2018. What was last year?
Last year, your favorite was Tool, which
that was a 5 out of 5.
For you.
I thought that was 2018. Good lord. But yeah, that's that. So highest album. I think this is the first time my highest album was actually not a 5 out of 5. But that's that. So my number one song of the year. This is the second time this band has had a number one song of mine. It's "House of Glass" by Era.
Oh, okay.
Which is probably my second or third favorite song by them of all time now. I've listened to it so many times. There's a lot of reasons I love the album. For the song, good lord, I hope their album comes out next year.
Yeah, I hope so.
This song in particular, I don't know if you recognize this while you were listening to it. There's basically a riff in there that's jacked straight from Lateralis. I can point it out to you when you listen to it, but it's Era did a lot of. I loved how experimental the song was, and it's like it has this sort of I don't know, the music, the visuals of the song sort of represent what it's like, what its meaning is, which is like the house of glass you live in is like it can get broken at any time. Um, it's like it's just that, like, you're secure, you're not secure, you're not safe from anything, and I think it's just the guitar riffs and like classic era. If you know anything about era, you know that they have some of the best guitar work of all time. That's thanks to Jesse mainly and how good he is with the guitar. Um, it's also his vocals too, and it's like now that JT is like he's kind of getting into the era style a little bit more. It feels like era is back to a place where like they can do more creativity than with their last two albums. Even though their last two albums have been great, this was probably House of Glass is probably their most creative song since I forget the name of the album from 2013, but the last one with their old vocalist, Augment.
Augment, yeah.
It feels like their most creative song since that album.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to what they do next.
Although Eye of God is pretty freaking.
Yeah, it was pretty hot. It was good.
Okay, so my number one album. I'm so glad that this band got to number one for me again. I didn't know they'd get to number one for me again, but they are a band who has made my top 10 every year, except for 1 year. But yeah, it's Declaration by Red for me. I adore this album so much. I'm going to have to slightly disagree with you that it's back to form, because I did like Gone quite a bit. That, if you'll remember, back in 2017 when that album came out, it actually made my top 5.
Yeah.
Now, I do like Declaration better than Gone, for sure, but I still think Gone is a really good album, and there are definitely some flaws on it, like that awful cover song,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of good stuff on it, and I still think I did like the experimental route that Red went on that album. I thought it was pretty good, but I will admit I am more of a fan of the more intense side of Red. I do think that is where they excel. And this album, of course, has that in spades. I mean, a lot of the stuff you said about Declaration, I definitely agree with. All For You is an awesome way to open up the album, one of their most energetic opening tracks, which is really something to say when you've also got openers like Breathe Into Me and Imposter. This song is just... I feel like Michael Barnes was literally shredding his vocal cords in the chorus. I've never heard him sing like that before. In fact, I feel like that was that's why I would call this Red's most intense album, because his singing is just, it feels a whole lot more raw on this album than it ever has,
gritty,
which is
very
what I
gritty.
love. You can just the talent of Michael's vocals on this album is absolutely stunning to me. He's always been a great vocalist,
And he does it live, by the way.
Yes, yes. And yeah, his vocal talents just shine through on almost every song here. I love Infidel. That line, I want to hear you scream, is just like, it's an iconic Red thing to me. And yeah, that song is probably the one that fit most onto Of Beauty and Rage for me, is Infidel.
Oh, for sure.
Such a
Yeah,
fun
for sure.
track. I agree with you that The War We Made has one of their most addicting choruses, and that one gave me huge nostalgia because it reminded me of End of Silence so much.
For sure.
Already Over vibes for sure on that one. The Evening Hate is of course awesome. That one made my top 10 songs last year, and it's probably my second favorite track on the album. Float is the Red's first time I feel like doing a sort of metalcore style. With the exception of What You Keep Alive, which is probably a little more metalcore in terms of it has a breakdown and this song doesn't. But this is the first time in the verses, at least, that Michael has done all stringed vocals, which I absolutely loved. I do sort of wish the chorus had kept that intensity, because it feels like it becomes a different song in the chorus, but I still did like the chorus quite a bit. And, I mean, it was just fun to hear Red even remotely coming close to metalcore. I've always wanted them to do that. Sever is a great song, just sort of another sort of classic Red thing. It's a song that you would expect from them, but I think it's great. And this one was actually, at first, one of my least favorites from the album, but it started becoming one of my top 3. I absolutely love it. Only Fight is a very interesting track from the band. Nothing like they've ever done before, very industrial and very bizarre, but I really enjoyed it. And then From the Ashes, of course, is an epic way to end off the album. That chorus just soars. Just so much fun. Great album all around. Absolutely loved it. Not perfect, and I would say it's hard to say where it would rank on my Red albums. I think I definitely like Obedient and Rage better, and I think I like Until We Have Faces better, probably. Maybe even Innocence and Instinct, but it's at least number 4, if not number 3 for me. But yeah, great album. Excellent album. Really affected me. And then my number 1 song, and it always seems like me and Joseph have at least one song in common every year. My number 1 song of the year is Cauterized by Red. This was undoubtedly my favorite from the album. It stood out to me right away. And I feel like while a lot of other songs on this album could fit onto other Red albums, I think what made Cauterized work was that it felt like it solely belonged on Declaration, and it was solely of this album's identity to me, which is why I loved it so much. It's one of the most different sounding Red songs in many ways, but it also does have some of their typical tropes, like the strings and stuff. But the way they use strings in this song is very different from how they use them in other songs. Like with Innocence and Instincts, the strings are always there, but in this song they use them a little more sparingly, which is why I think I love when they appear, because it's like, oh, there they are, and you love hearing them when they come.
For sure.
But, I mean, I'm not really sure I could describe how much this song resonated with me lyrically. That chorus just blows me away every time. One of Red's best choruses ever, which is, once again, really saying something. They have some great choruses out there, but I mean, I love Michael's vocals in this song. Once again, I mean, his vocal performance here sounds like unlike any other vocal performance he's done. He's almost like screaming a lot of the time in the verses. Like, the verses have this really unconventional flow to them that I've never really heard from Red, but I absolutely loved it. And yeah, I mean, the chorus just it just goes off, especially in the final time they sing the chorus out when the strings come in. It just makes me feel amazing every time that comes.
For sure.
And I love the message of the song, of course. I think it's one of Red's darkest, but also one of their most hopeful songs, because it's talking about some pretty deep wounds and deep problems, but it's also in the chorus saying, like, you know, through our faith and through each other, we can overcome these deep wounds together. And it's like saying you're not alone in your wounds, which I found to be really powerful when he's asking the question, am I the only one? Are we the only ones in the bridge? And then it's like the answer is no, and the chorus ends things out very hopefully. Yeah, love this song, and it's very deserving of my number 1 spot.
Okay, well, that was our top 10 albums and songs of 2020. We are going to be moving now.
Do you want to give some honorable mentions?
I don't have too many. I think
because I have a couple. I mean, I'm not going to go into detail about them, but
let me see. I think I might have. I know the Word Alive's new album came out. Was that this year that it came out?
That was this year, yeah.
I think that would probably be my only honorable mention. So, I mean, yeah, that's probably it.
For me, this album, Gluck, by a band called Boston Manor, was pretty awesome. Nothing But Thieves has a great album out this year called Moral Panic. Monomania would also be an honorable mention for me. Trivium's album, What the Dead Men Say, was also pretty freaking awesome. So, those are just a couple for me.
Okay. Usually we would do our top 10 movies of 2020.
I gotta get my battery.
Okay. Well, so as I was saying, usually. Sorry. Usually we would do our top 10 movies of the year. Unfortunately, I had bad with movies this year, and I for being someone who wants to make movies, I did really bad with watching movies this year. Partially wasn't my fault, obviously. There were very few movies that kind of came out to theaters, and I was just stuck in, like, you know, I don't know. I think we're gonna do a bit more of an informal discussion on movies this year, just because it was such a different year for movies. It's like where do you find movies? It's like, but I think I have maybe 2 movies that I saw this year.
I will say, I actually, even though it was definitely an unconventional year for movies. Obviously, I actually watched more movies this year than I did last
I don't
year.
even know how that's possible.
Mainly through streaming services. There was a lot of streaming. I mean, I'd say a good half of my top 10 came out simply through streaming services
Mm.
like Netflix and HBO and places like that.
Hmm.
Um, so, I actually, as of right now, I've seen 65 movies this year, and I'm planning on seeing a couple more. But I think I've got a pretty good top 10, but I won't go into a lot of detail on them. We can
Alright.
start with ones that we've both seen. So, what do you want to talk about first?
I think we both have seen the only two movies that I've seen this year. Unless I can't think of anything else. Um, we both saw The Invisible Man,
Yeah,
and we both saw Tenet.
yeah, we did.
I cannot think of any movies at this moment that I went to the theater to see. I went to the theater to see uh, Raiders of the Lost Ark, but obviously that came out in freaking 80s. So.
Yeah,
Uh, I don't know. There's not a lot for me personally to say about The Invisible Man. I would have loved to have had, an actual top 10, but hopefully 2021 can. I'll try to pay more attention to movies in 2021. But for me, I guess just talking about The Invisible Man a little bit, it would have probably been in my top 10 anyways.
it is in my top 10.
Just based on the movies that were coming out this year. I was under the impression that if movies hadn't gotten delayed, this year would have still been a pretty weird year for movies. Um, but The Invisible Man was a good.
Well, it just sucks that we couldn't see Dune this year. Is all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
That's the one I was looking forward to.
I was
so
wanting
much.
Dune so badly. But in terms of The Invisible Man, I guess what I can say about that is like, I don't know. I feel like horror movies are stuck in this like weird time loop where they're good and then they're bad and then they're good and then they're bad again. Like The Invisible Man was okay to me. If it had made it into my top 10, it would have probably been at number 10 if anything. That's all assuming what movies even came out in 2020 had theaters stayed open. Um, but The Invisible Man was a decent movie. I liked a lot of the. I liked the main actress. I forget her name at the moment.
Elizabeth Moss.
Elizabeth. I liked
Yeah,
her a
she's
lot.
good.
She was very good in that movie. I liked the twist at the end. It came out in like March, so I don't think spoilers are too bad of a thing. It's basically she becomes the Invisible Man, the Invisible Woman, I guess, and then kills her boyfriend or whatever. And the movie ends on a very dark note. I liked a lot of what the movie did, but yeah, that I don't know. It's gonna be hard for me to talk about movies because I don't know. I was so far away from movies because I just had no idea where to find them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll go through my top 10 list really quick. I'm not going to go into too much detail because, there's not much point since we haven't mutually seen much together. But I will say the movie seen this year was very interesting to me. I feel like if the movie seen this year had been like it was last year, a lot of these movies probably would have never made my list at all.
Oh yeah.
Because a lot of them are just streaming movies, but I feel like this is making me realize now that, maybe I need to start paying attention to movies that are streaming as well, because I feel like maybe I'm missing out on some good movies that, because mainly the movies I pay attention to are the ones that come into theaters, not the ones on streaming. And I think there's going to be a big change in movies. Obviously, next year, there's already been the announcement that WB is bringing all their movies to streaming and the theaters, which is a huge announcement, obviously. I'm not sure what that means for the future of the theaters, but it leaves me a little worried, I'm not going to lie. But here's my top 10. So at number 10, we have this movie called Shithouse. But it's actually a really good movie about. It's written, directed, and stars Cooper Raiff is the guy's name. He's a totally new face, but it's about him trying to adapt to college life. He's a college freshman, and he's feeling very lonely, but then he meets this girl, and they sort of bond together over one night. And the movie only takes place over about a day, but it's really good. And I felt like I could relate to it a lot because I felt like I struggled a lot in college as a freshman as well. and like struggling to make friends and getting to know people and getting familiar with the environment. And I think Cooper Raiff does a good job tapping into that. So I thought that it was a really solid movie and actually resonated with me a lot more than I thought it would. It's also legitimately funny in places. At number 9, we have one of my favorite horror movies of the year, Relic. Pretty intriguing movie that reminded me of The Babadook in that it uses something as a metaphor for something else. And in this, it's using like an older woman becoming a monster as like a metaphor for Alzheimer's or dementia. It's really interesting, and it's actually probably the scariest movie I saw all year too. Really good atmosphere and things like that, and I thought it was actually pretty touching, so I really liked it. And then at 8, this movie called Mangrove, which was about a true story in Britain where all these people of color were arrested for holding a protest, and it was claimed that they were being violent, but actually it was the cops who incited the violence. Some clear commentary there, but I think this movie worked really well. Then at 7, we have Bad Education, which stars Hugh Jackman, and he is excellent in the movie. And it's about a real life school scandal where it was found that one of the teachers was using the school budget to basically buy stuff for her family and make her family richer. And it devolves into a whole scandal. It's a dark comedy, but it's really good, and Hugh Jackman is awesome in it. Then at number 6, I have The Invisible Man, which I thought was pretty solid. Pretty good horror in it and everything like that. At number 5, I have this comedy called Palm Springs, which is sort of a time traveling comedy. It's pretty funny. Then at number 4 is Tenet, which was a really interesting movie by Nolan, to say the least. I think me and Joseph were both mind blown by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I'm still. I mean, I loved the story it told, but it was hard to process.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about Tenet, that's the one thing I can definitely talk about with accuracy is that, uh, you know, it's one of the it's a. I think a lot of people would have said that it's one of the worst Chris Nolan movies, which I wouldn't necessarily agree with. I think I don't know if I can point to a Chris Nolan movie that's bad per se. I think his repertoire is fairly good overall.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like if I would put it in, I don't even think it would be in my top 3 Chris Nolan movies.
No,
but
it
it's
wasn't for me either.
I loved Washington. I forgot his first name.
John David Washington.
John Washington. Yeah. And obviously Robert Pattinson is one of my growing favorite actors, if not my current favorite actor in the scene.
He's so good.
I think the movie it was extremely creative for one.
Yeah.
And I loved the way they, it was a little bit of a little bit experimental in terms of like cinematography with like the backwards mirrors and the forwards mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of really interesting imagery in the movie overall. And even though the story made no lick of sense whatsoever, I mean, there are very few Chris Nolan movies that actually make a lot of sense aside from the Dark Knight trilogy. So it really is up to you to like watch the movie and like interpret what was going on.
It's Christopher Nolan at his most Christopher Nolan.
Oh yeah,
I would say.
yeah. That's a probably good interpretation of it. But I mean, I loved it overall. It probably, even with other movies, I don't know. If Dune had come out this year, I doubt it would have been my favorite. But Dune being gone, that probably would have been my movie of the year.
Okay.
I mean, it would be the favorite movie that I saw out of the 2 movies that I saw.
Yeah.
So.
And then as far as my top 3, I'll rattle these off pretty quick. One called Possessor, which is a very just crazy body horror movie. Very futuristic feeling, where it's about this woman who puts on this machine device and possesses the bodies of other people. And eventually, and she does this while killing. She's like a hitman, so she disguises herself as a hitman in other people's bodies so that she doesn't get arrested for the crime. But then she possesses this one guy's body, and he sort of figures out that he's being possessed somehow. I'm still trying to figure out. It's hard to figure out exactly how. You sort of have to interpret it for yourself, which I actually like. But eventually, it becomes later on a question of who is possessing who. Is she possessing him or is he possessing her? And it's really interesting. And like I said, there's a lot of body horror in it. It's a pretty gory movie. I'm usually not a big fan of gore, but I thought this one did it pretty well. Um, then at number two for me is The Sound of Metal. Um, I think I liked this movie partly because it is about a metal musician, but it's also about he's a drummer who loses his hearing, and he eventually has to live with this deaf community and sort of learn how to adapt to his hearing loss. And it's a pretty sad movie in parts. It stars Olivia Cook from Bates Motel in it. She plays his girlfriend, and she's excellent in it as well. And the main actor is named Riz Ahmed. I'm not sure if you've heard of him before.
I have
but
not.
He's been in a lot of stuff, but he's excellent in it as well. And I thought it was a pretty powerful movie about like him like basically adapting to this to his hearing loss, and it actually was a pretty interesting representation of the deaf community too. I haven't seen many movies represent them, but I thought that was pretty cool. And then at number one for me, this is a Netflix movie called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It stars Jesse Plemons, who is superb in it, as always.
Love that guy.
And it is a wild movie. I will say that it's a movie about death, pretty much, which is what the title sounds like, but it's so much more than that. And there's just a whole lot of things you could dig into about the movie. It's partly a horror movie, partly a drama, partly a thriller. It's like a little bit of everything. It's made by Charlie Kaufman, the same guy who made Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and it is superb. So much good stuff. You'd probably like it, I think.
I think I would if it's those two people.
Yeah, and Jesse Plemons is in it. Toni Collette is in it, who was in Hereditary, and the guy who played Lupin is in it as well. And he's really good in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that cuts the podcast short. I did not do my part. Next year, obviously.
We talked about music for long enough anyway.
I think next year I'm gonna have to just go to streaming services and find some streaming movies. Hopefully next year we get to have a more official discussion on movies. But I think that's gonna do it for movies and for our top 10, and for the stream as a whole. I do hope you all enjoyed the Critical Podcast 2020. A little more different. We did the music at least, so obviously next year we'll come back with movies more officially, and we'll keep on trucking. But that'll do it. I hope you all enjoyed this stream. Thank you all very much for tuning in. To all the workers and such, do all the things as usual. You know what to do. I will be live tomorrow for a New Year's Eve stream with a variation of games and such, and we will see what we do. But that'll be that. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.